public image of Ireland's biggest sporting organisation, Ulster's 5th president hands over the Sam Maguire to Paddy O'Rourke of Down. It was April 1991 when Peter Quinn received his badge of office from the outgoing president, John Dowling. Quinn, aged 47, a former player, was hailed as the new Messiah, a man to lead the GAA into the 21st century. An honours graduate of Queen's University, this family man from Fermanagh had all the ingredients for an outstanding presidency.
I think that he is definitely going to be different and could be a breath of fresh air to the GAA.
He's very open-minded about our game. He's going to sell. He intends to sell our game very, very well. He sounds as if he's going to be a real players president.
A statement which rolls easily off the tongue. Is it fair comment or false? In 1990, Quinn led the elite players to Australia for yet another round in the Compromise Rules series. But is it a case of the sport favouring the best at the expense of the rest?
There is a tremendously positive reaction from the players who are here, but I think it's equally important to ascertain what the reaction is from the players who aren't here, and they are the majority of our players. In the end of the day, we don't want to become an elitist organisation, but the fact that there is an opportunity to represent one's country, to wear the Irish vest, is definitely very attractive to Irish players, and it sets a target for every player from club level upwards.
Our most valuable asset, that's how Quinn describes the players. In these changing times, the difference between our top teams and the others is immense.
The top 2 or 3 or 4 teams in Ireland usually get reasonably well looked after. I think there's 32 counties, 26 or 27 other counties. That it's just not fair, in my opinion, the way those teams are treated compared to the 2 or 3 top teams. He will try and level that out. It's got to be the same for all the Gaelic footballers.
I would like to see our whole structure of club games change, and I would want to see the games become more available to players, in the sense that every player would be guaranteed something like 25 to 30 games a year. I think the average club player is entitled to that. At the present time, we have a situation where county players are playing a game every week. They're probably playing 40 games plus a year. I remember Jimmy Barry Murphy one year played something like 67 games. And the average club player probably in that same county was playing 10 or 12. Well, I don't think that's a realistic balance, and I would hope to see maybe the county players play a little bit less and the club players play an awful lot more.
He has played the game himself. He's been a player. He has seen what it's like to be a player. And the thing I like about it, he feels that our game has to change with the times. And I think the GAA will really have to go with whatever's available. They will have to accept whatever sponsorship is available. And I think he's adamant that he will get as much as he can possibly for players and for clubs.
Is it time for the sport to turn professional?
Well, they certainly won't go professional, because the country couldn't afford 2 sports like Gaelic football and hurling as professional games. What I do see is possibly some relaxation of the rules on amateur status as compared to what they are at the present time. If players get something out of the game, that the association gets something out of the publicity that the players get. So we don't exactly lose by it when the players get a higher profile. And for my money, it would be nice to see the profile of Gaelic players on gable walls and things like that promoting products, because it would promote the association in the process.
As a player, Quinn's greatest success was a county championship with Timor. After that came officialdom and the presidency of the Ulster Council in 1986. He led the way for all meetings to be conducted in Irish. As a provincial chairman, the workload was considerable. As president of the association, Quinn's on call day and night.
Like, for example, we probably have the chairman of the Referees Development Committee in attendance with no rights to vote or to table issues.
The Gaelic Athletic Association is big business. The office for Quinn, a financial consultant, can be anywhere in the world, from Croke Park to the Caribbean, Enniskillen to Egypt. But he's committed to working the hours. It has its drawbacks. The presidency has cost Quinn money. Despite that, he sees it as a labour of love.
I have a family that's in the process of still growing up. They deserve a father and they need a father, and GAA or no GAA, I'm going to have to be available to them. I'm going to make sure that I find time for the family, because they'll only grow up once and I should be there.
It's been hard work for Mary and their 5 children. Their support has been a great source of strength for Peter Quinn. Since taking up office, he's averaged 20 functions a week, all over the world. Timor Road in Enniskillen rarely sees him. For Quinn, the rise to president is something which he never dreamed of. With his home club, he was first a player, a referee, and then chairman. In fact, as he put the final touches to his presidential address, Quinn was still the chairman of Timor. 1991, the Burlington Hotel in Dublin, and the annual Congress. It would be here, surrounded by former greats of the game, that Quinn would receive his seal of office. The 31st president of the Gaelic Athletic Association, an association over 100 years old, and an association with over 1 million members. The dream about to come true. Quinn realised the road would be difficult, but no one could have envisaged what a first year of controversy he would face.
So here made John Dowling in this and took instead of Sean.
Still, Congress was the time to speak out and lay down the foundations for what he saw as his vision for the future.
Over a century ago, Croke and Cusick articulated a mission for our association: the reinstatement in the Irish people of a sense of pride and confidence. Pride in their Irishness, in the uniqueness of their identity, and in the culture, language and heritage of the nation, and confidence in themselves. Today, that mission has still not been completed. We in Common Lou Class Gael have inherited a responsibility to be in the vanguard of the movement to revitalise the morale of our people. We control 2 of the greatest field games in the world, as well as supporting 3 others. We have invested enormous amounts in the development of sporting and recreational facilities on this island. We have contributed extensively to the growth and progress of our communities at local level. And, uniquely for an organisation identified by many of our fellow countrymen for a sporting role, we have been in the forefront of the social and cultural advancement of this country and of its economic development too. This is a time for positive, broadly based and confident approach by Common Lou Class Gael. It is a time for us to work to rebuild an assured, assertive and progressive image as a non-sectarian national body dedicated to the growth and improvement of all Irish people.
As the new president outlined his vision, many people believed he was simply a figurehead, bound and gagged by bureaucracy. But Peter Quinn was determined to get things done, like the £100 million redevelopment of Croke Park, the biggest ever investment of its kind.
What we're getting for that money is we're getting an all-seater stadium, which will be the best in Europe because it'll house just under 80,000 people. It's a stadium that will have very fine facilities. It'll be on 3 tiers. Most of the people in it will be covered. We envisage that we will be fit to fund the development of the stadium through the pre-sale of tickets, mostly through the pre-sale of tickets. We reckon that for phase 1, which is the only phase that will take place in the next 5 years, we reckon that we can raise in excess of £30 million through pre-sale of tickets. We'll have 3 different kinds of tickets. We will have what are referred to as season tickets, which will provide for access to all games that are played within the stadium for a 10-year period. And then we will have the remainder of the tickets, approximately half of which will be pre-sold on a 10-year basis for the 2 All-Ireland finals. The rest of the seats, the remaining 10,000 plus, will be distributed to our clubs and our counties on an annual basis, just as the tickets for the stadium for the last 100 years have been distributed.
A magnificent scheme, but is the GAA selling its soul to commercialism in the shape of hospitality boxes?
We'll have about 44 of them for sale at fairly large figures. Each one of them will hold 12 people. But there is always big play made in an organisation like the GAA of the rich, the big bucks as it's referred to, coming into the stadium. In fact, the boxes will account for less than 2.5% of the total capacity. £250 million is for a double box for 10 years. And they are for the big organisations. They certainly aren't for either small businesses or for our average club member. But somebody has to pay the big money to fund a stadium like this, and one of the sources would be through corporate support, and essentially we see the boxes as a way of engineering corporate support for ourselves.
Big business then, an obvious ingredient. But what about the average supporters and their needs?
Our preference, and it would be a very strong preference, would be to retain kerosene. Especially we would hope that the current Hill 16, on which we spent money relatively recently, would be retained if at all possible. And that, if you like, the ordinary man would have an opportunity of buying seats at a relatively, or buying access to the stadium at a relatively cheap price.
If we are allowed to retain terracing, then we would hope to continue to sell the terracing at the sort of price that it has been sold in recent years. If we reach the point where legislation requires us to cease to sell terrace tickets, then obviously that would be a little bit of a problem in the sense that we would have no very cheap tickets, which would mean that we would have to reduce the cost of our less good quality seating, and we never want to find ourselves in a position where the so-called ordinary punter can come to our games. We aren't an elitist organisation, we don't want to be an elitist organisation, but in order to fund the sort of development which is for the good of everyone in the association, we need to get money in from someone, and of course only those who have money can afford to pay for that sort of thing, but in the long term it will be in everyone's interest.
Well, not everyone is overjoyed, and that includes officials within the association. The Secretary of the Leinster Council, Michael Delaney, sees major problems.
I've expressed my reservations about it. I think it's a marvellous concept. But what worries me is our capacity to fund it on our own, and then having put it there, our capacity to maintain it. My argument is that a stadium or a development of this size must have government assistance. And I know that government assistance would probably be available, but with strings attached. Those strings being, I think, is well known that we would have to allow in other sports. I don't have a problem about that, but we have a problem in that our rules would forbid it. But I think if we want to look at the thing in a commercial sense, if we want to make it viable, if we don't want to put a millstone around the association's neck from central council down to club level, we must consider opening up this national stadium to other sports. People will say we're only talking about soccer, but we're not. We're talking about every possible activity. A stadium of that size must be open almost all year round and working to capacity to pay for itself.
Well, it could be argued that we only have 5 big days every year, and that's true, and it could be argued that investing 100 million for 5 big occasions every year is a little bit excessive. And I have some sympathy with that view. But the reality is that our members have said that they want more capacity. And there's another very important reality. And the other very important reality is that the stadium as it is at the present time will not be in a position to continue to host the crowds that it has hosted in the past. We're facing into an era of more regulation in relation to attendances at big sporting events. We're facing into a situation where there are proposals for all-seater capacity only. And if that happened as of now, the capacity of Croke Park would be reduced below 50,000. In the light of that, we have to do something. Whether or not what we're doing is excessive, we considered very carefully the options that were open to us. We even considered grander options and we considered smaller options. And in the end of the day, we came up with the option that we thought was best. If our members don't like it, of course, they'll reject it, and that's their right. All we have done at this stage is make proposals to them.
One of the crucial questions is whether or not the Irish government will provide finance, and at what cost.
We'll be going in to negotiate with the government later on this year, and we'll be going in to negotiate with the government on the basis of the moral commitment that they have, the social commitment that they have to our association in the light of what we have contributed over a century. And we'll be going in to negotiate with them on a no strings attached basis. The association makes all the decisions in relation to the use of our facilities, and that will be the way it will continue to be.
The thought of Ronnie Whelan and Ray Houghton joining James McCartan and co centre stage in Croke Park has been exercising the minds of many within the GAA. It may happen sooner rather than later.
I'm not too sure that it'll happen this year. It'll get a fair debate and it'll be a close call. It may not happen. But my own personal opinion is that it will happen in the near future. And I think it's like anything in life, personal opinion is coloured by the environment you live in or by the people you work or socialise with. And that's the background against which I say we're ready to consider change.
Building bridges could be difficult after the fiasco of the RDS affair, a proposed double bill of soccer and Gaelic football in Dublin. It collapsed when Croke Park withdrew permission.
It rebounded so badly on the GAA for a whole series of reasons. One of them was that there were those who wanted to have a go at the GAA anyway. There's a big number of those who don't support it, who have a very strong degree of hostility towards it and have a strong degree of hostility towards its aims. And some of them would operate on a political agenda and would certainly want to politicise the GAA. And indeed there have been attempts to politicise the GAA over the last couple of years, and I think possibly particularly in the last year. That was one reason why it rebounded on us. The second reason it rebounded on us was that some of the facts of the case didn't come to light until very late, and therefore that the decision was made very late.
It was a poor PR exercise. We have to accept the blame for that, and the general public got the wrong idea of it.
We didn't anticipate what was going to happen, and we weren't quick enough to counter it when it did happen. When we went public with the facts, most of our members then understood what we were about. Inevitably, there were a number of people who wanted not to understand, and I was obviously targeted. The fact that I come from the 6 counties certainly was a factor in the minds of some people in certain sections of the media. There was a minority in the media who certainly used it for political purposes, and I would have to say I was targeted.
We have a form of democracy, a committee system, and the decisions with regard to the RDS were made by one of those committees. And Peter Quinn was only just one member of that particular committee, and I think very unfairly the thing has been personalised.
What disappointed me most of all was the fact that it wasn't seen as a decision that was taken by a committee or by an organisation. There was an attempt to promote it as a decision that was taken by an individual. Now, I didn't take the decision. I didn't even vote on the decision. It wasn't my decision, it was an association decision. But I think it should be recognised that the President has one vote, the same as every other member of management, and I exercise my franchise when I think it's right, and I exercise it in the way in which I think is best for the association, and I have no intention of being intimidated out of that.
The big lesson we must learn is that if there's signs of something or an initiative like this in the future, we must think before we act. I think we acted, both sides, both counties accepted the invitations to play in the game. Some of our committees in Croke Park give permission, withdrew permission, gave permission again. I think all this has to be worked out before anybody's given a go-ahead to do anything in future.
Important lessons to be learnt, but the threat of soccer after the Republic's World Cup success and its attraction to the youth of Ireland is very real.
Probably the most important factor facing him is games themselves and a reaffirmation of Gaelic games among young people. I don't think we can ignore the impact of the Republic of Ireland soccer team in any way whatsoever, and particularly in schools down around 10, 11 and 12. That will reflect itself, that kind of competition will reflect itself in about 10 years' time. So I think it's at this stage we've got to get in and do a bit of work in the schools in particular.
I'd be reasonably happy with the state of the games. I'm not worried about the competition from other sports. Obviously, when a team goes out wearing an Irish jersey, it's inevitable that most of the country are going to support them. In fact, it would be very unfortunate if they didn't support them. But that doesn't mean to say that those sports are going to take over from the GAA, because they're not. The support is for an Irish team. It isn't necessarily for the sport.
The GAA is strong in rural Ireland, but the urban areas, particularly Dublin, are a source of real concern.
One of the challenges to Peter is what I described elsewhere as the invasion of the urban areas, where we have become more and more a rural organisation and have, I feel, abandoned the urban areas where there is a field there for us.
One of the concerns I would have, I suppose, would be a concern that in the major urban centres we're not getting the penetration, and I'm thinking particularly of Dublin, that we're not getting the penetration that we should have. Recent reports indicate that our share of the market in the Greater Dublin area is significantly smaller than it is any place else in the country. Now, given that the population movement in the 26 counties is towards Dublin, it's a bit unfortunate for us if we can't improve our situation in Dublin. So that would be one concern.
If the GAA has an Achilles heel, it's that it's perceived as sectarian by many outside the sport. Jack Bootman, a Protestant, hopes Peter Quinn will portray the movement as a unifying force.
What I would like to see him achieve is to pursue the ideals of the association in a non-aggressive way, so that more of people of my persuasion would see not the GAA not as a threat, but as a unifying force. Unfortunately, it is perceived in part of our nation as a divisive force, but I've always found it to be unifying.
Jack Bootman hopes for unity, but in Northern Ireland the security forces are not allowed to play the games. Critics label it a sectarian stance.
Well, it's not a sectarian sport. I think that's the first thing I would have to say. And our rules specifically preclude any form of sectarian or political bias within the association. The reality is that the security forces, for one reason or another, are not acceptable to a very large section of the population of the 6 counties. And until that changes, until harassment changes, until the occupation of grounds like St Oliver Plunkett Park and Crossmaglen, until issues like that are rectified, then I would expect that Congress may decide not to change the rule. It is a fact that if we were starting from scratch today, that rule almost certainly wouldn't be introduced. That rule was introduced from an historical perspective. What I think we have to address is not why the rule was introduced or when it was introduced, it's what circumstances are needed to change it. I would hope, very strongly hope, that those changes will occur sooner rather than later. But until those changes occur, I think that the chances of the rule being changed are quite slim.
The Troubles in Northern Ireland have seen many attacks on GAA property, but there was also a more sinister threat from loyalist paramilitaries, threats roundly condemned by both sides of the community.
I was very heartened. I was very heartened with the almost unanimous view that it was totally unfair that we should be targeted in the way in which we were targeted at that time. And I was very pleased too that the UFF acknowledged that and withdrew the threat at that stage in the form in which it had originally been issued.
Peter, on a personal level, would you be worried about your own safety?
Well, that's a very difficult question for me to answer. Obviously, I have to be concerned when the association gets threatened. As the figurehead within the association, I have to be a little bit concerned, but it's not something that I lose an awful lot of sleep about.
Away from the problems of Ireland, the GAA continue to strive for international recognition for their games. But off the field of play, it's VIP treatment all the way.
The fascinating thing about this bloke, Jack O'Shea, because in the program that I've still got from the 1987 game, but his age in 1987 was 34. Now he's listed in 1990 as 33. Not bloody bad, is it? Sorry.
Humour apart, the compromise rules is the only viable international stage available, and for the time being it will continue. But for how long?
The GAA will have to decide. Do they really want an international outlet in the future? They don't need it today, we all know that. But maybe 5-10 years down the road, they might feel that they would like an international outlet for their elite players, in particular for the players from the weak counties.
Ireland leading by 10 points into the forward pocket, Kevin O'Brien.
Congress last year approved that we would continue to negotiate with the Australians on the possibility of a further 2 series of matches. We're due to meet them sometime later on this year, probably in the early summer, but I suppose depending on the nature of the discussions, further tours are possible.
Presidents of the Gaelic Athletic Association rarely make much difference. The 31st president could make all the difference.